What's the scariest 100% true story you've heard of? My high school GF called late one night after I was home and in bed. She said that something had happened and asked if I could come over. She was clearly shaken and not full of details. So I told my parents and drove over towards her house. At the top of her subdivision, I was met by a cop with lights on. He asked where I was going and I told him about the call from my GF. He lets me go by and I come over the hill to the cul-de-sac where she lives and I see multiple cop cars around the circle. They watch me pull up and get out of my car. My GF comes running out of her house and meets me in the street. She explains that someone had broken into her neighbor's house and started beating her with something heavy. The neighbor managed to get out of the house and headed to my GF's house where she started banging furiously on the front door. My GF's dad was out of town, so her mom answered the door and the neighbor just fell into the foyer, bleeding profusely from the head. Her mom looks up to see the attacker headed up the walkway towards the front door. She pulls the neighbor into the house and closes the door, hitting the attacker with it before it fully closed. He then took the heavy tool he had used to beat the neighbor and smashed the little window at the top of the door. Her mom started screaming and the attacker just turned around and walked up the street into the darkness. I spent the night there that night, along with 2 or 3 cops outside in their cars, and in the morning we could see blood still pooled on the floor in the foyer and splattered blood above the front door from where the attacker had swung the bloody tool to smash the window. No one was ever caught or even identified. It was just completely random. I would call it creepy more than scary, but my mom's friend had a small house and lived alone. She noticed weird things: a batch of soup depleting faster than usual, missing eggs, damp towels in the hamper when she hadn't used any, extra dishes in the dishwasher, etc. This went on for months. She thought she was just being forgetful. One day she heard some thumping around in her attic and went to investigate. She found some makeshift living quarters. Small radio, hot plate, sleeping bag, pillow, food wrappers, etc. She called the cops who came to keep an eye on the place. They ended up catching a homeless man climbing a tree, trying to sneak into her attic window. He had been doing this almost daily. He would wait for her to go to work, then go downstairs and help himself to food and amenities. The funny part about this story is they got to know each other throughout the ordeal, and the guy was actually very respectful, just down on his luck. She didn't press charges, instead, let him move in, helped him get a job, and he lived in the attic until he got back on his feet. Creepy shit with a happy ending. I work midnight shift at a gas station, and I have for quite a while at various stations in different areas with varying levels of criminal activity. I have regulars, of course. I'm a small-statured woman, as is my partner the other half of the week, and we've always been partners, so these regulars often worry about us and keep watch on creepy occurrences when they can. I had one man who worked in the metro an hour away who would stop in every morning for his cigarettes. He never smiled or seemed friendly, and as I often do, I tried to think of what I could do that might make him smile one day. It took many months, but I finally pulled it off by having his cigarettes ready on the counter and already scanned for him to pay for as he walked in. He smiled, and then asked me, "Do you ever get scared on the night shift? You small girl is not safe." I said I sometimes did, but we could lock the doors and hide if we had to, and that the provincial police, think state troopers, if you're American, had a station close by and came in often to get their highway vehicles washed. I had a good rapport with those police. He nodded and then told me a story about when he first moved to our country from Eastern Europe with his wife and child back in the late 80s, early 90s. He fell asleep at work one night at the gas station he worked midnights at. When he woke up, the phone had been ringing for hours and his manager was shaking him violently, asking if he was all right. He was fine, he said. What was the problem? He was sorry he fell asleep. His manager screamed that it was fine he fell asleep, to look outside. All of their motor oil was missing and the outside of the place was a mess. The thieves had come and swiped all the oil and left him be because he slept through the entire thing, and then moved down the road to the next station for an encore. At that station, the clerk was awake and fought back, so the thieves stabbed him to death and left him to bleed out. When he finished telling me this, he concluded with, "If you ever feel sleepy, just lock the door and do it. It might save your life." I don't work at that station anymore, but I think about that guy all the time and wonder how his grandkids are. My grandfather's village was raised by the Nazis. He had 9 siblings. The Nazis came to the village in retribution due to guerrilla attacks, and they believed the guerrillas were hiding there. Most young men fled before they arrived. The men that were in the village were lined up against a wall and shot. My grandfather's mother put half her children, the youngest, in the cellar, and she took the other half with her, because the Nazis were rounding up the entire village and locked them inside the church. The reason she had split her children was because she feared they would all be killed, so she wanted at least some of them to survive. The Nazis ransacked and burned nearly every house in the village, including my grandfather's. He was in the cellar with his siblings, and their house burned above them, but they were saved. Those in the church also survived, but many didn't. After this, the Nazis would come again some time after and pretty much force all the young men and boys, including my grandfather, to help make roads and fortifications for them. Despite it all, they all survived the war, though many in the family didn't. The events surrounding the father and son who built submarines and explored the bottom of Lake Tahoe. It's pretty widely known that it's one of the deepest lakes of the world, and at the bottom, a combination of almost freezing cold water and low oxygen keep things preserved for a very long time. There are underwater tunnels that reach between Lake Tahoe and other smaller lakes, and things will get trapped in pockets of the tunnels and whatnot. There are reports and pictures of fully preserved Native American Indians, and gangsters in pinstriped suits, and enormous grizzly bears. It gets creepy because there is another lake in the area which has 2 names. One name is the official name, which I'm not sure of, and the other is Dead Baby Lake. This is because the local Indians would bury young dead babies in the lake, hoping their spirits would live on. Anyways, when the father and son reached the bottom of the lake in their submersible, they recorded footage of what they saw. Upon resurfacing though, they were both very visibly disturbed and wouldn't talk or show evidence of what they saw. They locked the video away and proclaimed that the world isn't ready to see the things they had captured. The legend of Bearman. So people think of that one South Park episode with Bearman Pig. No, it's not even close to that. So there was this camp I used to go to during the summer. There was probably around 500 kids there for a week straight. Everyone had cabins they would stay in assigned by gender and age, and had an older person be in charge of one cabin. The older person was around 17 to 18, watching 13 to 16-year-olds in the cabins. And then the staff were actual adults who had their own cabins, but they would be on night shift duties to walk around and make sure everyone was staying in their cabins. So now that you kinda know the setting, let's get into the legend. As it goes, in the woods, and when all the kids were in the cabins and the lights were out, a bear would come out from the deep woods and wander into the campgrounds. The bear would then stand on its back legs and walk as if it was a human. Then it would choose to go into a cabin, and if you were unlucky, it would go by your bed and watch you sleep. If you made any single move, it would grab you and take you into the woods, never to be seen again. Hearing that scared the crap out of 14-year-old me. It was something the older girl told all of us. A bunch of the other girls were like, "PFFF it, so we stay quiet and sleep," but other kids from cabins heard of it too. I never stopped thinking about it, and I would always try to stay as still as possible when I slept. Flash forward a few years later, I ran into one of the staff that used to work at the camp, and I told them about how scared I was about Bearman, but it was a good trick to use to get kids to stay quiet. Well, turns out, it's actually based off a true story. I guess back in the 80s, a man dressed in a bear costume, which was some sort of mascot for the camp at the time, and take girls out of their cabin. So, as you could imagine, to my horror, I was completely bewildered that Bearman actual existed at some point in time.